Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had a nice lunch. This is Yunte Huang, who's a Guggenheim Fellow, who has taught at Harvard and the University of California, Santa Barbara, where he is a distinguished professor of English. He's the author of Inseparable and the Edgar Award-winning biography of Charlie Chan. Both books are National Book Critics Award, Book Critics Circle Award finalists, and together with Daughter of the Dragon, they form a trilogy on Asian American film. Very excited to welcome Professor Huang, and he's going to start with a presentation on Anna May Wong.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Tiffany, and thanks to everybody for being here. It's really nice to be back in Hong Kong. Actually, I used to, commute between California and Hong Kong because I also have a teaching gig at Lingnan University, where I was a chair professor of English for a few years. So I'm really honored to be here and to be really happy. And I see, some of you brought my other books. So I'm just going to begin with that to explain. So to talk about Anna May Wong, because it's a trilogy, people often ask me, when you started out, did you know it's a trilogy? Of course, I didn't know that. Like many things in life, they came by accident, by chance. Even this book, but the first one in the trilogy, Charlie Chan, I'm sure you guys are familiar who he is. He's like often regarded as a demeaning characterization of Asian Americans, right? Chinamen, so-called. And but as I found out, well, let me just explain, put it this way. So I was born in China. Wenzhou is my home city. And I grew up there, and I went to Beijing for college. And then in 1991, that's a long time ago, 33 years ago, I left Beijing and landed of all places in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Don't ask me why, but it's quite a culture shock, to put it mildly, after 4 years in Beijing, now in Tuscaloosa. And then I migrated north to Buffalo, New York, where I did my graduate study. And when I got out, I got lucky. I found my first job as an assistant professor at Harvard. That's where I actually kind of came to know more about the Charlie Chan story. It turns out, behind this kind of Chinese icon, there was a real Cantonese cop by the name of Chang Apana. So it was based on a real Chinese detective in Honolulu. But the author who invented the character turned out to be a Harvard graduate, Earl Biggers. So that's how kind of long-winded way of explaining how I kind of tried to open the Chinese box, or Russian doll, however you want to call it, the layers of mysteries, cultural mysteries, and all that. So that's really my first book. Moving on to the next one is Siamese twins, the original Siamese twins, Chang and Ann Bunker, for those who are not familiar with the story. And these are two Chinese boys. They are called Siamese twins. As a matter of fact, their father was a Chinese immigrant fisherman coming from Canton, settled in Siam, now known as Thailand. And they're born as, with the bodies joined together, conjoined bodies, at the base of their chest. Their livers are connected. So anyway, one day they were discovered by a traveling Scottish businessman who saw the golden opportunity, because this is 19th century, early 19th century, and they were regarded as freaks. So they were basically bought by this traveling businessman from their mother and shipped off to Boston. They arrived in United States, in Boston, in 1829. So for about 3 years, they worked like slaves, basically, making a lot of money as a freak show. They would travel around, show their bodies, and collect, the money for their owners. But they're very smart, and that's part of the reason I was attracted to their story, not because of curiosity, but because how tenacious they were and how smart they were, really. Despite the fact they're regarded as subhuman, they're very smart. So after 3 years, when they turned 21, they broke free from the owners. They actually said goodbye to the owner in Buffalo, my home city, and said like, "Fuck you, we are done." And sorry, is that okay? Is that allowed in this club? All right, but anyway, And for the next decade, they continue to display themselves, okay? Being humiliated, poked at, and even assaulted physically and verbally. But they knew exactly what they're doing. They made a lot of money out of the paying customers. And after about a decade, they got sick and tired of this. And so they retired very comfortably, rich, really rich, to a very remote town in western North Carolina because they don't want to stay away from the crowd. And this is where the story took a very strange turn. And they were, famous people, rich. It's like Elvis Presley coming to town in some ways, to a small town like that. And they managed to marry two white sisters, okay? This is before the Civil War, and were the very few Chinese or Asians in the Deep South. But because of their wealth, because of the charm, they were able to marry two white sisters. They ended up having 21 children, so they got really busy. So today, the Bunker clan, I was invited to their annual reunion after the book came out. The Bunker clan had about at least 1,500 people. I mean, 21 children after about, how many years? You do the math. But of course, the part of the strange turn is that they became slave owners themselves. They bought and traded slaves and everything. So this is really part of the story that when the table is turned, the victim sometimes becomes the victimizer very easily. So that's part of the story. And because of the Charlie Chang book, my investment is always in this kind of the epic journey of Asian Americans in the making of American history. So Charlie Chang represents really this kind of iconic image, right? Representation of Asian Americans in the 20th century. And Siamese twins took me back to the earlier decade, the 19th century, and throughout the Civil War and everything. And now back to the third one, Anna May Wong. Anna May Wong used to sing this song. Actually, somebody wrote for her. It's a party song, like, my name is Anna May Wong, and I'm from old Hong Kong, kind of rhyme with her name, but she's actually not from Hong Kong, right? She was an LA girl. She was born in a laundromat. She was a daughter of a Chinese laundryman in Los Angeles. And so her story, her rise from the daughter of a Chinese laundryman to a global icon, it's an amazing story. And of course, this story has been told before, but my take is really to look at the large canvas, that out of which she came. So she was born about 3 decades after the infamous Chinese massacre in LA, when 18 Chinese were lynched. White mobs, came into Chinatown and they killed, brutalized, and murdered, and burned, and 18 Chinese. So it was a very hostile environment which she was growing up in. She was born in a year of dragon, 120 years ago. So she was a daughter of a dragon, literally, 1905. So part of my attraction, or part of her story, the charm, is this. Laundry and chop suey joints. These are like two staples, okay? Speaking of kind of stigma or stereotype, it's like taco trucks, right? Kind of represents ethnic business. For Chinese, early immigrants, laundry and the chop suey joints. And this, of course, has to do with the limited opportunities for Chinese men when they came from Canton or Fujian to, for gold rush, because when they got there, they didn't find, gold because they were driven out to the minefields. And the only business opportunities were like washing white man's clothes or feed them. And that's how these two, staple kind of Chinese-American businesses came about. But this is not just the only kind of history involving laundromat. Turns out Hollywood, from the very beginning, was very interested in Chinatown in LA, but also the laundry. And if you look at the early films, Thomas Edison, for instance, the early trailblazer of cinema, his first 2 short films, were exactly about Chinese laundrymen. The reason was that it's twofold. First of all, Chinatown. Early Hollywood, I guess in those days, LA traffic wasn't that bad. It's very easy to just drive across town and shoot the scenes. And early cinema is like that cinema, right? A camera is right there. It's still, right? You put the camera there, you don't move it around, you're just taking the street scene. And what better free street scene there is like exotic Chinatown, where people walk around dressing, strange costumes. So Hollywood will come over, and laundry, because of the robotic movement and everything, became really part of Hollywood attraction. So Chinatown on top of laundry, and so it's kind of serendipitous, really. The first Chinese icon star literally rose from Chinese laundry. And so that's part of the story. And I'm going to skip forward. Young Anna May Wong got lucky during the Spanish flu, 1919, when Hollywood was making two major Chinese films. This is one of them, called The Red Lantern. And that film needed about 600 live Chinese bodies, because people were dying on the street during the Spanish flu. Everybody was afraid to go out. And it was very difficult to scare up 600 bodies. And she got lucky, become one of the lantern carriers. And that's really her, her, I would say not foothold, but toehold. She got a toehold, and then she got a foothold through her connection to Alla Nazimova. Sorry, how do I go back? Oh, how do I go? Oh, yeah, okay, I need to go back. So Alla Nazimova she's the woman who coined the term called the sewing circle, which is a coded word for lesbians and bisexual actors. And she became Anna May Wong fell under the tutelage of Alla Nazimova, and she's really the queen of silent film from Ukraine initially. And this young Anna May Wong at this swimming pool, Alla Mova's backyard garden. And that's from there she emerged as really, and this I was talking to Daniel about this film. This film made in 1922. This is so-called the first Technicolor film, right? How are we doing in time? About
120.
120, how meaning 5 minutes or 5 more?
10.
Okay,
10, yeah.
good, yeah. Tall the Sea is so-called the first technical color film. And she was only 17 and it's actually unthinkable in those years, because the standard practice is called the yellow face, right? Part of the Charlie Chan scandal or controversy is exactly because of the actors who play Charlie Chan are always white, and Asian Americans are really pissed off by that, stigmatized. So that was really the standard practice. Why would Anna May Wong be chosen to play the lead part? Not just because she was smart, beautiful, and talented, but actually there's a very cynical reason, is that, remember, this is a technical color film. Early Hollywood was very deeply invested in the technology of color, because those black and white films, cameras, if your eyes are blue, they actually look very dull. So the early black and white film technology wasn't good to bring out, according to the filmmakers, bring out the beauty of Caucasians. So they are invested in color. And this is the first Technicolor experiment in which they actually needed real Chinese bodies, Asian bodies, to give a face, the eye and everything. And so she got lucky, but for a very cynical reason, if you know what I mean. And the film did very well, actually grossed about $250,000. It's a blockbuster. That will lead to her next one. This is with Douglas Fairbanks, Thief of Baghdad. I was telling Tiffany, I just came from 2 conferences on the mainland, where one of them I gave Anna May Wong talk like this, and these 2 images were censored. Because the film was made in, for me, the film was made in 1924, exactly 100 years ago. So if you follow Anna May Wong's story, it's kind of ironic that at the time, a lot of Chinese followed her as well, the media, but she was also criticized for wearing too little clothes, showing too much flesh. 100 years later, the story remains. It's just so, so fascinating to some extent. So after this, this is a Chinese theater in the heart of Hollywood, right? The Mecca of Hollywood, built in 1927. So as far as her career was concerned, she reached this dilemma, kind of crossroad, where, because in 1927, when this Chinese theater was finished, Hollywood was making at least four Chinese films, China films. Anna May Wong was in every single one of them, but she never got a big part. So the dilemma was that no Chinese film can do without her, but no China film can really have her as the lead. And so that's why she left for Europe, joining the exodus of ethnic artists such as Josephine Baker, Paul Robeson. They all went to Europe to seek better opportunities, where she really flourished. So she did a kind of trilingual films, German, French, and English. And it's like Netflix today, right? Each different languages, the same story can be made. But Hollywood had that long ago, actually, not just Hollywood, the film industry. And she learned German, French, and English, and all that. But funny thing is, of course, these were all silent films at the time, only subtitles, right? And when this picture was taken, it's like an occasion like this. It's fall 1928. She went to Germany in the spring of 28, and this is Weimar Republic. And Weimar Republic was just like the golden era for about a short decade or so, the sudden explosion of energy and everything before the rise of the Nazis. And this picture was taken. If you look at them, on the left is the famous Marlene Dietrich. In the middle is Anna May Wong. On the right is Leni Riefenstahl, later known as Hitler's camera woman. When this picture was taken, the real star was actually Anna May Wong, standing right in the middle, because Dietrich has not made Blue Angel yet. She was famous, but not that famous, was not a star yet. So if you follow the trajectories of these three women, you pretty much can map out the history of 20th century, really, how they ended up, where they ended up being. This is Piccadilly, the last silent film she made. And this is really a beautiful film, made in UK. After that, she achieved this dream, which is to be on live theater. As you know, early stars, film stars, most of them started out from Broadway, live theater, because that's real art, serious art. Film is like TikTok, like short videos or something, wasn't serious art. And so Anna May Wong always wanted to be on live theater. As a result of her success in Europe, especially with the Piccadilly, she was invited to play the lead role in this film, this play, starring next to Laurence Olivier, actually. And remember, throughout these years, she was very successful as a silent star. She never spoke yet. So on the live theater in Shakespeare's town, she spoke. And the critics were appalled because her California Valley girl accent came out. And you can't do that, right? So that's when she realized. And it's, of course, it was the same time, 1929. A lot of the silent film was transitioning from silent to talkie. And if you remember, a lot of the silent stars fell by the wayside. The minute they opened their mouth, the charm is gone, basically, the spell. And Anna May Wong immediately realized she needed to do something about it in order to survive. And she did. She spent a lot of money hiring a coach from Oxford University. So she left America like a young flapper. She returned in 1931, 1930 in the fall, basically speaking kind of upper-class British English, sporting basically designer clothes, European clothes. So that's her transformation. And Daughter of the Dragon, from which my book took its title, was really a major film she made after her return. And this is she played the daughter of Dr. Fu Manchu, right? The opposite of Charlie Chan, the bad Chinaman versus Charlie Chan as the good Chinaman. And she's starring next to the famous Seto Hayakawa, the Japanese star. If you track, one of this interesting thing about history, you guys are journalists, you dig for facts. As a cultural historian, if you dig for facts, reality is really strange, right? Because if you just follow like Seto Hayakawa, he was the real, first male sex star in Hollywood. If you talk about racism, in the 19-teens, he's most famous for the 1915 film called The Cheat. And after that, white women will flock to him. It's like he's the first, like, sexual body. And this, of course, it is Shanghai Express. We're talking about the high-speed rail from Hong Kong to Peking, Beijing right now, and that's the Shanghai Express. And she's starring next to Marlene Dietrich once again. I think this is really her best film in some ways because it's kind of noirish, and she has the best deadpan lines right next to Marlene Dietrich. Despite the fact, Dietrich was the star, but Anna May Wong really held her ground. And these are her famous nail guards, well-protected nail guards. As a professor, I always have the fantasy of wearing nail guards. And if I point at the students, ask you a question, you better get it right, right? And this is the famous, actually on display a few years ago in Hong Kong Museum, from Palace Museum. This is the Emperor Dowager's nail guard. And one thing I admire about Anna May Wong is that she's not just a beautiful, talented film star. She has the she's also a fashion icon. So she has the unique ability to turn working class symbols such as coolie hat and coolie jacket into high-class fashion. And that's really part of her charm as well. So she failed to get the big part in Good Earth, the China film, those in the 1930s. She was disappointed, so she came to China, to Hong Kong, and this is the view of Hong Kong Victoria Harbor from the peak, actually, the year she arrived. And so she was just here some years ago. She toured China for about 9 months, and trying to study Chinese theater, Peking opera, trying to introduce Peking opera to the world, studying with Meilan Fang, actually, this old Peking, and she befriended Frank Dorn, who's a military attaché in Beijing, American military attaché. And of course, this Black Saturday with the Japanese bombing of Shanghai. So she was in China right before the Sino-Japan, the full-scale Japanese invasion took place. And during those years, especially in World War II, she poured her heart into China relief. She sold her, changsang, the Chinese robes, to raise money, and she donated money as well. And she made a number of, she traveled as far as Australia, also to raise money, made these films. And then, of course, Madame Chiang Kai-shek, when she came to the United States in 1942 to raise money, to raise support, rally support. Her last stop was actually in Hollywood. And at Hollywood Bowl, the whole town turned out for her, for Madame Chiang Kai-shek. The only one who was not invited was Anna May Wong, because Madame Chiang Kai-shek did not want another beautiful and talented Chinese woman to compete for the stage with her. And so she was snubbed again. So her story is really like both Chinese and Americans would somehow, feel strange. So she was living at a time, I think, in a nutshell, that Chinese would be regarded as too Chinese to play such a role. Okay, that's just like, if you want to ask me for like one fortune cookie saying about Anna May Wong, this is a woman, talented woman living at a time when Chinese will be considered too Chinese to play. And that's why she failed to get the Good Earth part, the lead part. It went to Louise Rayner, the Austrian actress. She actually was very good. She won Oscar for the role, to her credit. But in speaking of taste and the cultural paradox, so her late years, she played big parts and everything, and she was hanging out at this Dragon's Den, actually, in LA. This kind of, once again, serendipitous. The daughter of the dragon spent her last years having cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other. That's really how she spent her last decade, being alcoholic. And she died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 56 in LA, in her home in Santa Monica, and buried next to her mother. And she finally got a star, in Hollywood. And 2 years ago, the United States Mint issued commemorative coins in her honor. As somebody who have tracked her career in admiration, I know it's a long overdue tribute, but to speak in the Happy Valley term, is that I always knew that she's on the money, if you know horse racing term, right? So for the occasion, we are gonna have the conversation with Tiffany, but for you guys, actually I brought about not the hat, just the book, but so this U.S. Mint,
Oh, wow.
you know U.S. Mint, right? It's actually Trader Joe mints. But inside of this, of course, it's a brand new kind of Anna May Wong
Oh,
coins.
wow.
So I had to buy them from the dealers because they are snapped up. You can get them in circulation now and then, sometime, but they all get dirty. And these are the brand new ones. So they are interesting. I have about 10 of them here. You know, this will be your fortune cookie, a souvenir. So I only have 10 of them. If you want them later on, I'm gonna keep it here. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. My first question is, why were all the romances that she played in, why were they all so doomed? Why was she doomed in all her love affairs on screen?
Yeah. So just like I said, she was living at a time Chinese will be too Chinese, so therefore it has to be yellow face. Otherwise, no fun, right? The same way in reality, right? That miscegenation, right? The field miscegenation. So interracial kissing was not allowed on the screen. And as one historian said, the kiss is really the soul of 20th century love in film. Everything, Gone with the Wind, every romance film, not just Riding into the Sunset, kiss has to be happen before them. So without being able to kiss a Caucasian star or something, of course she cannot get the lead role. And therefore, she always played, second fiddle, doomed, either had to die or broken-hearted. And that's really, yeah.
And what, in the book, one of my favorite chapters was about her time in Berlin. So could you tell us a little bit about why Berlin was so keen to have her as a Hollywood actress and also a representative of Chinese?
Right. Global competition. Hollywood was rising. Hollywood made about, I think, 90% of the films for the world. So European cinema was trying to compete. Our Hollywood. And what better way to our Hollywood is to get a Hollywood star. So that way, that's how Josephine Baker and then Paul Robeson, sick and tired of racism, they took off. So Europe was really a haven for her to some extent. I'm not saying Europe didn't have racial issue. I mean, far from it. Nazis were just coming out of the shadow in a few years. So at least for the moment, giving her, the fact she represents America and Hollywood, the prestige, so she was able to enjoy, a few years of freedom, artistic freedom, and she really flourished, as you can see from the films.
So was she basically importing like the Americanized gaze of Chinese in the film she was making there?
Well, because of Europe's different relation as far as colonialism is concerned, like Germany, right, used to have colonies in China or in other parts of Asia. But as a result of, in the wake of World War I, Germany lost it all, right? Qingdao, went to Japan, causing May 4th movement. And the plots all kind of connected in some ways. So because of the strange, different kind of relationship, colonial history, and the reality and everything, and she really brings different things. So Europeans were mystified by her. She's America, she's a California girl, and she's also China. So in UK, she actually got the honor of being the Chinese ambassador, and she'd never been to China at the time. So she, part of her legacy, I would say torture legacy, is that, and that's why she's still being kind of criticized by some kind of historians for playing along. People say, like, why do you have to play those parts, right? Why didn't you just give up? Of course, that's impossible question for her to answer. In order to survive, you have to play along to some extent. And so she's caught in between, these two very different choices.
And all this time, China was taking note as her star was
China is
rising.
still taking note.
Yes. So could you tell us a little bit about what the authorities made of her?
So on the one hand, Chinese viewers and critics and film historians were following her, very happy that we have a Chinese face, and because for decades she was really the only real Chinese face on the screen, and so they're happy about that. On the other hand, they're also very critical, especially the conservative ones, were really troubled by, like I said, she was wearing too little clothes and showing playing along, kind of playing these tragic figures. Otherwise, make China lose face, so-called. And so they were offended. So her reception during her 9-month tour in China, including Hong Kong and Beijing and Nanjing, was really mixed. And this is a stark contrast if you read my Charlie Chan book, for instance, when I write about my favorite Chinese Charlie Chan actor, Warner Olin, the Swedish guy who came along, played Dr. Fu Manchu, play Orthodox Jew in Jazz Singer, right? The cantor Rabinowitz, and then he successfully played Charlie Chan. He also came to China in the same year, 1936, and he was welcomed as the Chinese son, basically. They embraced him. Of course, gender is part of the issue, that Anna May Wong was a woman and had to be more careful about what she's playing, whereas this European guy, Caucasian star, Chinese forgave him for playing the bad Chinese, which is Dr. Fu Manchu. And they embraced him for playing the good Chinese detective. So her, her legacy, reception of her remains a mix of many things.
One of the very interesting anecdotes in your book was that there were Chinese actors who were trying to imitate the yellow face acting of, was it Olin?
Right.
Yeah, as they
absolutely.
portrayed.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
right after Warner Olin left Shanghai, Chinese, the cottage industry of Chinese film started making out its own Chinese Charlie Chan films. And strangely, like Tiffany said, they actually imitated Warner Olin's imitation of Charlie Chan, Chinese. So this is what I call the twilight zone of yellowface. We imitate each other. Which one is more real, right? You guys journalists, we are living in the age of post-fact, post-truth. So it's all about representation.
Were there any Chinese actresses imitating yellow face depictions of Chinese women? Or was it only, the male character?
Mostly male, but to be fair, for instance, yellowface is not just about, today we say, oh, that's so racist, but that's not enough to think this way. If you really want to think deeper, why Americans are so addicted to this art, or everybody else, art is imitation, and that's kind of cliche, but as far as America is concerned, the founding of America is predicated on racial mimicry, right? The Boston Tea Party involves a bunch of Bostonians going around, dressed up as Mohawk Indians and grunting stage Mohawk words while dumping chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. So racial mimicry really is at the heart of American imagination. But to go back to yellowface, so yellowface or blackface or redface or Jewface, it's not just about Caucasian actors doing all these characters. It's actually about, for instance, black actors doing black characters will actually imitate the blackface actors. The same way a real Chinese actor, let's just say, playing, like Anna May Wong, playing a Chinese woman, she has to play in a certain way, kind of tradition established by Caucasian actresses already. Because otherwise, the director over there say, cut, Chinese women don't speak this way. And Anna May Wong say, well, I'm Chinese, I speak this way. And the director said, no, it ain't so, because Marlene Dietrich did it differently. So art has its own tradition, right? So yellowface is not just meaning racist. You have to dig deeper into see what's actually happening, right?
So one of the reasons why Anna May Wong didn't get a part in The Good Earth was because of Chinese lobbying efforts. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, the Chinese embassy. So recently somebody wrote a book, The Red Carpet, right, tracing the history of Chinese influence in Hollywood. It turns out China was invested from the nationalist government in 1930s or 20s even, And because of the huge import of Chinese films into China, and it set up a committee to basically censor, to screen and censor. And they also are invested in kind of overseas diplomacy as well. So they have some influence in Hollywood, actually, or lobby through the State Department. And so when the news came that they were considering Anna May Wong for the part in Good Earth, Chinese government was concerned because of those two images kind of in Fever Baghdad. She was showing too much flesh, bringing humiliation to China. So because of a mixed reputation, so-called, in China, Chinese government lobbied. So her, being unable to get that part, not just because of Hollywood racism. And that's why I think, it's investigative journalism is important to dig for. Otherwise, we just, arrive at just, be comfortable with just cliches. Yellow face is racist. So, Anna May Wong is just said, that's just past. But what's happening today is still happening. Right?
I'd like to take a step back and ask, what was your first encounter with film, in particular Hollywood, when you were growing up in Wenzhou?
Ooh, yeah, I grew up in Wenzhou, a small town in Changnam, the Yishan. We have one movie theater where we actually have, screen a lot of foreign films, actually, but mostly from, I would say, socialist countries like Yugoslavia or India, Pakistan, Vietnam, and everything. But the way they show this film is that they will show the same film for about 2 weeks. And my father was a film kind of addict, and there's nothing else to do. There's no TV. I saw my first TV when I was 13. So in a very crowded room, a corner shop, and everybody was kind of getting a glance of this magic thing. So film was a real big thing. So my father would take me to these films every night. It's the same damn film. But it helps me, actually, because after that, after dinner, we'll walk around, and my dad will help me analyze the characters and everything. So I guess I grew some kind of sensitivity toward film, not just entertainment, but the criticism, to kind of stay back and look at it from a different angle.
Did you watch any Anna May Wong then, or
no.
that type of
Oh,
film?
no, not Charlie Chan, no Anna May Wong. I think I saw, I remember like Pakistani and Indian films. I mean, if I can tell this joke, with Indian films, whenever the song breaks out, like courtesan songs, that's when people stand up, go to bathrooms, because when you come back, they're still singing. Right, sorry. That's what I remember. Not Hollywood, but mostly, Pakistani or North Korean films. We saw a lot of North Korean films because of the connection of friendship, which, of course, have a different representation of Korean War as well, right?
So in some ways, there are a lot of contemporary themes in this book. It's about the role of entertainment in a time of excess and war. I was wondering, what themes stood out to you as in her life story that stood out to you?
Right. So romance is part of that, or the forbidden love. I mean, her Anna May Wong story, of course, in essence, is forbidden love. She was not allowed to kiss a white actor. She's not able to get a real Chinese, big Chinese part, and how she can do it and not to do it and everything. But, so let me put it this way. When I wrote that Siamese Twins book came out, I was interviewed by Terry Gross. And she asked me this one question. She said, if you were to meet the twins today, what question would you ask her? Actually, it's kind of a lame question, but I took it seriously. I answered, I said, I wanted to ask them why you never went home. Because after they were sold by their mother, they left. Their mother died, a few years later, but they still have siblings and everything. And they never went back. They became rich, and they never went back. They have their own families, of course, 2 families, 21 kids. I mean, they're really busy, maybe. But for me, I grew up here, and I went abroad, and of course, I always want to come home. And that's unthinkable for me. As far as Anna May Wong is concerned, part of my question and my attraction or my devotion was always thinking about her late years and thinking of Hollywood sexism, ageism especially, because ageism, the minute when she hit late 30, her career just went downhill. Think about Sunset Boulevard. It's really another kind of portrayal of her story as well in her 50s or the 50s as the decade as well. So my question for her was that I really want to ask her, like, did you have fun? You know, you went to Europe, you know, early days, attending the party and you know, as a young teenager, you know, being suddenly so successful, it's a dream come true, and then somehow, you know, you encounter a huge obstacle in Hollywood, and you took off, went to Europe, and became a really global star, and you got your heart broken again, and then came to China, you know, all that. Did you have fun? I mean,
Thank you so much. We have yeah. We have about 10 minutes for questions. Please.
Hi, thank you very much. I have two questions. One is about her relationship with Mei Lanfang. It was only in the 20s that women began to sing Peking opera. So one of his jobs was to train women how to play women in Peking opera. Anna May Wong wasn't doing that. Did she spend a long time with him or whatever? Second question, maybe a wee bit unfair, but Graham Hodges' book on Mei Lanfang, he was also in Hong Kong.
Anna May Wong.
Yeah, and Anna May Wong.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was also in Hong Kong 20 years or so, and I heard his lecture, and I read his book, and I'm reading yours now. How would you describe the different approach?
Sure. Well, Graham is actually a good friend, very generous supporter. He helped me with the book as well. We just did an event in New York together. So to go back to Mei Lanfang, another May, your May actually. Anna May Wong first met Mei Lanfang actually in London, okay, before her China trip, and she became fascinated, okay. Like I said, Anna May Wong's, her part of her passion was really live theater, okay. Because of the racism in Hollywood, the limitation, she turned her attention to Chinese and she was really searching for a Chinese soul to some extent. And where, what better place to look for a Chinese soul in a Chinese opera, let's just say, right? Are there Italians here? Italian opera? So when she came, supposedly to study with Mei Lanfang, actually, and they met in Shanghai. Mei Lanfang was commuting between Peking and Shanghai. He had places in both cities. And so they met up. But Anna May Wong immediately realized the problem. Okay, she actually wanted to study. Mei Lanfang was willing to tutor her. But of course, as you know, just like Italian opera, enunciation. Her Mandarin Chinese was not very good. She grew up speaking Cantonese, and she actually played hooky from Chinese school in order to go to movies to become a film star. And that's really the price she paid, not studying her Mandarin Chinese well. And in Peking opera or any opera, the enunciation, one word will spell all the charm if you miss pronunciation of one key or something. So that's when she realized she can't really do it, okay? So she started collecting, she ended up collecting costumes, opera costumes, and books and all that, and with the hope of going back to the United States and maybe do something organizational so she can bring Mei Lanfang to, bring him out again because he just did a tour and she wants to do that. So to go back to Graham Hodges, okay, let me put it. There are two ways I can explain how the way my book is different from other biographies. First of all, you may have noticed I like to digress. In other words, if you ask me a question, I want to go back, step back, and bring out a much bigger story in order to come back and say, how is this relates to what I just said? And to me, that's actually very important. It's very absurd. I feel ironic to say, somebody has written 3 biographies, or 4, depending how you count the Siamese twins, right? I'm actually not interested in biography, actually. I'm interested in how history, what is the historical context out of which these stories come about. So, because in order to know me, then, it's not enough to know, where I was born and all that. You have to know what happened in Chinese history, why I left Beijing for Tuscaloosa and all that, right? So I think, so in that sense, I'm really interested in this that's why I said that the epic journey of Asian Americans, using these 3 as representations to tell a much larger story, right? That's one. And the other is about style. So when all these books, I wrote all these books because I failed, I should say, with Glenn. Joe is there, his friend, Glenn Ma is my best friend. So when I landed in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, I was stunned, the culture shock, just name it. So I ended up running a Chinese restaurant. I started a Chinese restaurant. It's still there, actually. I no longer own it. And so I struggled for 3 years as a Chinese restaurateur. And all these years, I want to write about it. And I started writing short poems about it. I wasn't happy. And I started writing a novel about it until Glenn one day saw a chapter and he said, dude, why are you still writing a novel? These are all like true stories. Why don't you write a memoir? And I said, memoir? Don't I have to be like 60? I'm almost 60 now. Sorry, no offense. At the time, I was only 30. And Glenn said, well, he's a book agent, an editor, a fabulous editor, a writer, a poet himself, Glenn. And he said, well, nonfiction is easier to sell for him as an agent. So okay. So reluctantly, I wrote a memoir called Yellow Alabama. I'm yellow, so Yellow Alabama. To claim my space between the black and white, because Tuscaloosa, deep south, is really, you're either black or white. Middle is really, doesn't really exist in those years. So that's my experience. So I finished the manuscript, and Glenn helped me shop it around. They got rejected over and over again. Every time they came back with the same kind of rejection and with the comments, say, this guy has an interesting story. He seems to know how to write, but he needs to be more forthcoming about his story. I took it, it means too much literature, not enough sex in my memoir. So, but listen, I'm not very comfortable to say, I know I'm talking but speak to journalists, facts are important. But as far as the Chinese is concerned, the narrative style, for me, to show and conceal is equally important, to give and withhold. I'm not comfortable with, say, like Oprah Winfrey, like reality TV, naked confection, American style, or just the facts, because facts come with their own representation. So writing this book, I was really trying to kind of keep the balance between not really withholding anything, but as far as style is concerned, I think it's not just digging for facts, because to her justice to her story, to her experience, to her charm, I want to write the book in a certain way that really fits her story, in a style, I wouldn't say pseudo-oriental style or anything, but so I think the form has to match the content. So that's part of my, as a writer, as an author, that's where my heart is, partly. So I would say that's how my book will be different from other biographies. Yeah, thank you.
So 2 questions, and I'm going to ask you to speculate. So if you don't feel comfortable, just say no.
I'm from Wenzhou, and it's all about speculation,
All
business.
right. So 1, Anna May Wong. Had she been born 100 years later, how would she have done in Hollywood and just generally? 2, she traces her roots to Taishan, I believe it is. What is it about that place that so many smart, famous, whatever people seem to trace their roots from there?
Yeah. Well, let me answer the second question first. Yes, just like my hometown, Wenzhou, we are known for being smart mathematicians, cunning businessmen. We're called Chinese Jews, usually, because if I speak to you, you better watch out, what's in your pocket. You wouldn't even know when you're swindled, sort of thing. And so Taishan, when I travel in that area, turns out, Chang'an was from next county as well. Not just Taishan, I think. All this Zhongshan, it used to be Xiangshan, and all that area. Those are really, the vanguards of Chinese immigration. Dr. Xing Yat-cheng from there, if you count it. And so there is certainly, and that's why I always make a point with every, story. When I'm done with the book, I have to go and see the place. Like, although the story is about 100 years, so the Siamese twins story, when I was done, actually I drove from Santa Barbara to North Carolina, and I camped out in their farm just for one night, just to feel like the feng shui to some extent. The spirit hovers. So I don't know, I cannot answer that question, but I can only describe there's certain kind of feng shui about certain places that as writers or as journalists, you name it, we are kind of feel attracted to. So second question, 100 years later, what about Michelle Yeoh? So people ask me, so how do you think about it now? The Asians are apparently quite, thanks to Squid Game, Korean cinema and everything, seems like it's becoming increasingly trendy. To go back to the earlier, what I said earlier about yellowface, art has history, has established rules and traditions, routines, just like in journalism, ways of doing things. And those things are actually very difficult to change, take a long time to change, right? And that's why Michelle Yeoh, for many decades, was stuck with playing mostly kung fu, roles in these kung fu characters because of the long tradition or the kind of racism, the practices and everything. So yeah, we are moving along. But it's kind of very slow step. Sometimes we go backwards. Sometimes it kind of not progressively, progressing fast enough, I guess.
I'm afraid we might have time for one quick question. Yeah. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Yunte. It was a fascinating talk. Just curious, you just mentioned you were in mainland China for a few meetings. And given the sort of context today, how are stars like Anna May Wong perceived in China today? Has it shifted? Were they previously seen as sort of heroes or sort of applauded? Or obviously we know they didn't like the scantily clothed photographs, but how has that changed today, the perception of these American but Chinese stars?
Well, are you guys interested in news? So here's the news for you. So before my book came out, the editor who did my Charlie Chang book a few years ago, the Charlie Chang Chinese edition came out, did very well. I was invited to Shanghai Book Festival in 2014. Again, did very well. So the same editor, moving on to a different press, was trying to bring out a new edition of the Charlie Chang book. And she also bought the rights to this book. And when that Charlie Chang new edition was about to go to print, it got killed by the censor, just last year, because the censor felt that's too much material about humiliation of China. Because in China, to talk about Asian Americans, inevitably you talk about the racism against them. It's just the same way like calling Hong Kong the colony, let's just say. So yeah, these are history, but that history needs to be buried a little. As a result, my editor said, what about the Anna May Wong book? It's written the same way. It covers the same kind of ground. The censor, same thing. Unless you cut out the part where Chinese were humiliated, discriminated against, then you can't do the book. So, but of course, it's like a Siamese twins. You can't separate them. So, yeah. So I think I can only answer the question that way, in the sense of not just the films. I think my interest is really about, about history, what can be represented and what cannot. And that really, of course, bothers me, intrigues me, angers me, but galvanizes me too. So, thank you, Joe.
Thank you so much. Are there books for purchase? Do you know?
Sorry, actually, I brought some books, but at these two conferences, I gave them out. But I managed to keep the coins. So that'll be the souvenir. Please take one, the coins. I only have 10 of them, so please feel free.
Thank you so much,
thank you all.
Yunte. Thank you.